Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Decision Hour. I'm your host, Adam Bird. I got a great interview lined up for you guys today. Get a pen and a pad, something to write on. You're going to want to take notes for this one. With me today is Mr. Jeff DePatie. Hope I pronounced that right. He's a former Tier 1 SF guy, but now he's really focusing on sharing the science and the possibilities of a theory that's really kind of long forgotten called post-traumatic growth. And we're going to get into that and some of the other stuff that Jeff's doing today. So without further ado, Jeff, my man, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. Absolutely no pressure, eh? Get to the pencil and pens out. Wow, I love it.
Hey man, let's dive into this, man, because I really like your story and everything that what you're about and what you're doing right now. So tell my listeners just a little bit about yourself.
Like you said, I'm a former Tier 1 operator, but I'll back up from there because who I am is not really there. I'm originally from Northern Canada, Northern Ontario to be specific. You know, grew up in the woods, all that kind of good jazz. Yeah. But very early on in my life, I became super intrigued with this concept of stress and adaptation. And I didn't really call it that at like 8 years old. You know, I was still picking my nose. Anyhow, over the years, I explored this and it led me down some dark paths and it led me down some really great paths, but overall it led me down my path.
Yeah.
And once I got into being an operator, I really started to see it play out, the human dynamics of it all, right? Through selections, like this molding of clay for, in this case, to make soldiers,
right.
But the potential of it to make really flexible yet resilient human beings became hyper prevalent. And it forced me down some roads and it guided me down some roads. But one that I think is most unique to what we're going to discuss on the show today is after I left the military, I got what's known as severe PTSD. And severe PTSD has a lot of factors with it. It's not just because of the concussive damage I received. It wasn't just because of stressful situations, because anyone who leaves the military and tells you that they weren't in some stressful situations is lying to themselves, right. You know, yeah. The pressure of becoming a soldier, right? Basic training is not, beach day with a beer. It's collapsing you in already. You know what I mean? Like physically, mentally. And anyway, so that leads to, identity shifts afterwards. And then, finding purpose. The military is really good at assigning purpose. So when you step out of all this, there's all these factors, including your health and all that you got to start to kind of wrestle with. Anyways, as I discovered what, I kind of poetically call the dark night of my soul, down there, I found tools along the way that I share. And the first concept of that, Adam, is like you mentioned, is post-traumatic growth. It's knowing that on the other side of post-traumatic stress disorders is this potential to expand your capacity to be that your dark times can come with like really great reason, including connecting yourself, to others, bringing even more joy into the world. Like it's not as I say, it's not a promise of like a perpetual smile,
right?
But it's the ability to handle life with almost more grace and more adaptability.
How does one that is dealing with PTSD and wants to get to this growth, this post-traumatic growth side of things, how do they recognize that they need to get there? How does one take that first step in going that direction?
Yeah. What $1 million question, right? In a lot of ways. But here, I do have some signs and like, we'll call them symptoms, if you will,
okay.
But some signs. So what happens is PTSD is a survival mechanism and it drops your mind down into a survival mode. So it's not a state of weakness. It's actually you stepping into like ultimate warrior mode where you literally constrict down and your attention centers stop throwing signals up to your upper cerebral areas. I'm just like being super colloquial with that. Yeah. But in essence, it starts to shut down your prefrontal cortex and your higher decision capability because you're focusing in on a problem. Okay. And as we all know, as soon as you start becoming a soldier, you begin focusing in on a problem. Whatever is going to be the mission, for the mandate, whatever that is, that becomes your problem, and you're focusing on it. You're training, you're adapting, you're molding to it. And what this does, though, is it creates feedback loops that start playing out. So someone can start recognizing this constriction through isolation. They are not connected with other people as much. They are not connected with their entire emotional toolbox, right? Usually the emotions they're connected to are shame, guilt, apathy, fear, anger, and then lower level desires. Those are some of your cues, right?
Right.
For dudes, if you're, I'll say it, if you're masturbating a lot, uncontrollably, like I don't mean like a fiend, going
Right.
crazy anywhere in Walmart and whatnot. I just mean like porn has got a grip on you.
Yeah.
That's a distraction and an addiction. So that brings me to my next place to look at.
Okay.
What are your distractions that are not serving you? Okay. They can fall into addictions,
Right.
Like alcohol, drugs, and whatnot. Those are some really good signs. But are you fucking binge watching Netflix? Are you numbing yourself from facing those pains? That's the secret.
Okay.
That's the secret. The ego doesn't allow you access to those, right? Those moments were too stressful, too painful for your nervous system to fully process. So the ego puts up a block. The problem is they sit down low in your memory system, and they're there, kind of like a house of cards, right? Those are the cards that build that up. Now, we made a documentary called The Dark Night of Our Soul. It'll be released soon.
Okay.
It explores all of this. It explores my journey through it, explores other people's journeys through it. People who like you look at and you're like, how did you ever pull yourself out of that? You know what I mean? Like, that is not to make one story more or less. It's all relative.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like someone's pain is relative. But the first step, no matter what you do, whether you do VR training, ketamine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, stressful events, almost always the first thing you do in order to do these things is interact with someone else. Okay. You start talking to someone else. That's the key. Hey, Adam, I'm feeling this, or I'm thinking this. Sorry, you want to say something?
No, I want to ask, because a lot of listeners, for those you're talking about, like, psilocybin and the ketamine and stuff like that, or these alternative plant-based medicine stuff that we're starting to see more and more of. I did a series on some of this stuff with a couple other guys late last year, and you're starting to see more and more of these alternative medicines and stuff come up. But they're, I say, oh, where are you guys going? Well, we'll fly to California, but then we have to go to Mexico, or they're flying somewhere else. So it's like there's not a lot of things that are offered here in the United States for these types of treatment. Now, you just mentioned that before you start, or when you start doing one of these alternatives, that you start talking to somebody. Is that like you go to like a group setting or something, and you have like a guide or a counselor there that's walking you through this process?
No, I'm talking about just literal human interaction with a different being.
All right.
Like starting there. Yes. Therapies and analysts, coaching. Those are all great modalities. Some of them are less than awesome, but I don't want to start the conversation with less than awesome, because the other thing that gets engaged is your prefrontal cortex. You start actually building new pathways, because that's your ability to move from A to B, to set goals, right? So symbiotically, or in parallel, you're starting to use other parts of your brain. Think of it like muscles.
Yeah.
If we don't use those parts of our brain, different parts, and we just use the anger centers or the limbic systems or whatever, we're only going to use those, right? So we got to nurture all of them, including the communication aspect. So you touched on plant-based medicines. What they do is they move your brain into a high entropy state. High entropy is what they call chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it has a lot of potential to settle. So, things like DMT kind of are like living in a dream, and they'll organize and wire. But in essence, you're disrupting your pattern. So anything that disrupts your pattern, which i.e. is out of your comfort zone, okay, not the edge of your comfort zone, but out of it. So things you've never explored before will do this very same disrupt. It'll force your brain to try to recalibrate in reality. Okay. Now, plant-based medicines are really great. You mentioned here in the US, we are starting something called Citizen Green that will use medical cannabis as the base for altered states. It is very powerful. We use it kind of recreationally or as a numbing agent, but it actually has great potential to help someone out. And we found a way to bring it to the vets because it's not fully covered in the US. In Canada, we're going to have it covered,
Yeah.
but at about 30% at least discount, no matter where they go, really. So that'll be something like we're super happy about. And then that when they move into that program, they're also going to get access to basically my programming for walking the post-traumatic growth cycle, if you will,
Okay.
and all the tools and steps along that.
Let me interrupt you real quick. For the
Yeah,
listeners that
please
are
do.
Jeff, for people that are listening right now and they want to get in touch with you, work with you, or find out more information about what you do, where can they get that information?
Um, I think no matter where you are in your journey of life,
Yeah.
you could stop by posttraumaticgrowth.film
Okay.
and watch our trailer. And the reason I mention that, Adam, is so that we can start building trust, so that people know that like I'm not just singing off a prescribed sheet of music here. And it starts to build like that symbiotic nature and trust. Also, they could check out the specialforcesexperience.com and head down the rabbit hole there. There's all different kinds of things, and that'll bring you into the Citizen Green area. And then not just the program, guys and gals, it'll also be a really great container for conversation and whatnot, which are important. A lot of people say these words
Yeah.
and there's something missing. And I know I have my theory on what's missing, but I don't, I can touch on it. I
Yeah.
will
Let's hear it, man.
so I think you can project from a love-based paradigm
Okay.
or a fear-based paradigm. Fear-based paradigm is anything that's like I mentioned those fear-based emotions earlier,
Right.
where that patterning is set into your body and your mind, and where you filter information through and you project it outwards. There is another option to us. I don't want to say it's taken away like by some evil villain, because it's not that. It's just the way our consciousness is adapted over time as a species, as a whole, whether you're a creationist or, a Darwinist or some kind of like fundamental physicist, it's getting more complex. Okay.
Okay.
And we are just starting to fully grasp our capability of what that means to project from these other perspectives. And most of the containers that are built from a fear-based place. They're attempts to do it from a love-based place, but there's a few little things missing in there. And I really don't want to go down it too much because then
Right.
it can start sounding a little finger pointy, and
Right.
that's not how I am and
Right.
what I really look to do.
That's interesting, though. Listen, folks, if you're listening to the show, first off, it means you're online. So just open up another browser, and you can go to the specialforcesexperience.com or go to posttraumaticgrowth.film. Did I say that? Was that correct,
Yeah.
Jeff? Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And check that out and follow him and get involved and let's have some conversations, guys. Jeff, I want to back up real quick.
Yeah, no problem.
You transitioning out of the military, what was that transition like for you? You touched a little bit on it. So that's question one. The second part of that question is, how long have you been working on this post-traumatic growth?
Okay. Well, unfortunately, the militaries of the world haven't caught on yet that the transition phase should be at least as long as some kind of like a quote unquote basic training length or something, at least. I'm just throwing that out there.
I agree.
I think at the end it would save them money.
Yeah.
It would save a lot of homeless issues, a lot of drugs and all that kind of stuff to undo, right? Just like Rambo said, you don't just turn this off,
Right.
no matter where you are, like you
That's
don't.
a great reference.
So for me, it was a little bit like kick to the curb ish.
Yeah.
The problem is there is programs, but they're so disjointed and they're not holistic and they're not designed to flow really well with a transitioning soldier at all.
Right.
So the first little bit was pretty chaotic in a lot of ways, getting my footing, like asking questions, what am I going to do? Because like I kind of had this, I don't really want to be a contractor or work for the government feeling after I left the military. I was like, I want to own my time a little more.
Yeah.
And then I was like, man, I was a sniper for so many years. I was an operator. I was an infantry guy. What am I going to do with what I'm going to do? But, as I allowed space to open up, creative solutions did come in. So like most people's transition, it was a little bit funky. And like most, it usually takes about 2 years to fully like get the speed wobbles and allow like things like PTSD start setting in, or PTS, or any of the issues that come with that, like the myriad of them. Um, yeah, so the term post-traumatic growth, it was coined by a couple American guys, Tedeschi and Calhoun, in the 90s, right around the same time as PTSD, but it didn't get traction, even though it's as old as time. It's a very human cycle, right? To be stressed and grow. Think about like Herculean labors and myth and Joseph Campbell's hero story, right? We go into darkness, we get stronger, we bring an elixir back, something for others. So what we actually did is we started doing something we call intentionally facilitating post-traumatic growth, where you purposefully stress, physiologically and psychologically a person.
Yeah.
And that allows that what we'll call altered state to open up and allow new possibilities in. And we can do this without dictating what those new possibilities should be, right? We set the container, the arena for this to be a potential. Because there's something really interesting about humans. We get I'd say almost all of us have been to a very dark place. But as soon as you're actually thrust into survival mode, you kick into gear. You know what I mean? Like if someone's depressed and you start choking them, they usually fight for their life.
Right.
And that actually gets juices flowing. It gets the mind going. It does a whole bunch of good things. Now, I'm not saying we choke people to help them out. It's much more a scalpel than a hammer. But it's human nature, right? Like, there's something about it that I think is also paradoxical, because when we're a little too cushy and not in survival mode and we're depressed, man, that's a recipe for some disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. So this post-traumatic growth, I'm a visionary kind of guy. So I'm hearing what you're saying, and and for me, I can't help but to compare, like if you have PTSD, that some would say that's a negative that you're trying to combat, overcome, what have you. And then post-traumatic growth would be the opposite of that, or the positive side of that. And it sounds like this traumatic growth is when you can get people on that, where they're opening up, like you said, it opens up worlds of possibility for them. And what's wrong with that? Nothing. I think that's what we need. We need more of. I'm surprised, because it wasn't until when we first met that I'd heard post-traumatic growth, even that phrase. I'm familiar, obviously, with PTSD and PTS and whatnot, but the first time I've heard post-traumatic growth was the first time you and I had spoken and whatnot. And I was kind of upset that we haven't heard about it, or we don't hear about it as much.
Why I could touch on why.
Please.
Why I think, anyways, this is the world according to me.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't pay the bills. Insurance doesn't cover it.
Yeah.
Disabilities don't cover it. It's not part of that holistic solution. So it's a little bit tricky to implement. I think we all know this, Adam, to our core, to be true.
Yeah.
It's just right now and I'm not pointing the finger at anyone, because everybody who came before me for me, has laid the foundation for us to have this conversation. So it's not a finger point. What it's about is dropping our old psychic pillars that hold up our mentality right now.
Yeah.
And knowing that some of our systems were created from a fear-based mindset, which means they may not be ideal for our long-term survival, but definitely not ideal for us to thrive, to achieve expanded states. Like, I'm not talking about like some dope smoking hippie expanded states. I'm just talking about the ability to emotionally feel love more, to feel more connected to everything we do, So that's my thought on why it hasn't caught the same speed. And then, you know, the way the medical system works is they don't want to ever give false hope, as they call it, right? With any kind of diagnosis. I just think it's counterproductive. I think it actually makes us look away from something that can make us stronger. And I don't think there's anything really wrong with giving hope. You know what I mean? Like it's not this is the solution, this is the way. It's like, hey, this is maybe why you're suffering, because everybody that pulls out of the deepest, darkest pits of PTSD, which everyone is capable. Anyone listening, you are capable. There are people out there. Just kind of like the first step has to be you mostly. It has to be, you know, you have to be the one who takes the first step. That's the unfortunate part, I think. But it works both ways. But oh man, I lost my train of thought there. Where was I going?
You were coming out of it. We were talking about the medical side of it, and you don't feel like it's. And I agree with you on this. We should be giving hope to people. There's nothing wrong with.
Oh yeah, that's what it is. One of the greatest badges of honor, and we've seen this through history, Adam, is those who have conquered dark times and what we call incorporated them in healthy ways have been some of the most powerful people on earth. And we almost like owe it to each other to do this as a species so that we don't keep repeating cycles that don't serve us. Right. And that's the key. Traumas come from even before we're born through epigenetics. They're handed down in our DNA, and then we're conditioned. They're there. And I use the word trauma as a catch-all, but just energetics. It's all atomic energetics that gets warped and morphed. And that's an evolutionary factor. Yeah. Just humans have this really fucking cool ability. We can consciously do this. You know what I mean? We're the only creatures we know of that can do this. Like the universe has gifted us the ability to create like this. And as we transmute our shadows or our traumas, we will see a little bit more and a little bit more of what we're actually. I mean, look what we're capable of now.
Yeah.
What could 8 billion of us like really, not like working together towards necessarily a single goal, but like what could we be possibly like I can't even imagine what we could do. You know, I can't.
It leaves you speechless trying to think about it because there's so many possibilities. And quite frankly, the word hope just keeps coming up into my mind right now. Like, man, you just spread hope and positivity in the world. If we did more of that, you know.
If I may, Adam, I hate to cut you off, but I've kind of boiled it down to just the individual believing in themselves to be themselves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, not like some skewed individualistic dysmorphation of it, or dysmorphia of it.
Yeah.
But just the belief that you can be yourself. I like I'm downplaying its complexity, but its simplicity is true. Like believing that you can manifest yourself, and then ultimately the collective stuff will take care of itself, I think.
I love it. Jeff, you mentioned you're doing a documentary, Dark Night of Our Soul. Any idea when that's coming out or when people expect it?
Yeah. So we're May 15th. We're going to start showing a short version of it.
Okay.
And what we're going to do is we got to raise some funds just to finish up the last little bit. We kind of did this backwards. So this was our first documentary. So we learned a lot of lessons, but we knew we wanted to get this out. And what we're eventually, the idea is mid-October will be the launch date for the full thing, but it could be sooner.
Yeah.
Depending on our impact campaign to run funds and stuff like that. But yeah, the short, and not only that, what we're doing is we're going to show the short and then we're going to hold a panel, but not just like a one-way conversation. We want to start having the conversation because you've learned things that I haven't learned and I've learned things that someone else hasn't learned. And somewhere in there, like a Venn diagram will be the overlap of what we can really do.
That's cool, man. Listen, we're coming up on time, Jeff, and I got a feeling you and I could just talk for hours on this because I'm just fascinated with this stuff. But I have one more question for you, my friend.
Sure,
it's a question
shoot.
I ask everybody. You're on a show. It's called The Decision Hour, and we make decisions every single day. Name a time in your life where you had to make that decision? Your feet were on the line and you have to make that decision. What was it? And what was the atmosphere like at that time?
You know, I could default to doing a military one, but I'm gonna go a little farther back. And this one's a little bit different. It was I'd strayed off my path, if you will.
Yeah.
And I fell into drugs and alcohol, and I was arrested a few times. And then one day my mother came to speak to me through the glass on the phone in the orange jumpsuit. And it would have been easy for me to keep following the easy path for me, you know, keep destroying myself, keep fucking around.
Yeah.
But in that moment, I sensed the desperation in my mom, that she wasn't disappointed in me. She was disappointed. She thought she failed. And it changed everything. It was one of those decisions that was in an instant, literally standing feet on the ground. But yeah, I think that's the one I would go with.
Man, I thank you for sharing that with us.
Mm.
Jeff, I really appreciate you taking time out of the day to talk with us today, man.
No, pleasure's all mine, Adam. You guys are doing good work.
Hey, you always got an open mic here, my friend.
All right.
Folks,
Thank you.
That's all the time that we got. Make sure that we're going to have websites up again. If you're listening to the show, open up another browser. Posttraumaticgrowth.film is one of the websites. You could also go to thespecialforcesexperience.com. Let's get involved, folks. Before we let you go, also go check out our parent network, Heroes Media Group. All the new shows. We've got some new shows going on over there, as well as some new events coming up and articles that are out. So go check out the website, heroesmediagroup.com. Until next time, you've been listening to The Decision Hour.